A bombshell leak has just turned the British political chessboard upside down, and what's coming could rewrite the very idea of sovereignty in the United Kingdom. According to documents obtained by sources close to Brussels, Prime Minister Keir Starmer was caught secretly negotiating a kind of reconnection with the European Union, all behind Parliament's back and without any public consultation. And to make the earthquake worse, King Charles himself broke royal silence and sent a coded message that sounded like a warning to London's political elite. The mood in Westminster is one of panic and disbelief. Ministers are in shock. MPs speak of betrayal. And the people, the very same who voted for Brexit believing in the promise of independence, are beginning to taste the bitter feeling of being deceived once again. Brace yourself, because what's emerging now is not just a scandal. It's a direct threat to British sovereignty, to Parliament's power, and to the role of the Crown. Something that could put the very future of the United Kingdom at stake. It all began innocently enough. A routine diplomatic trip to Brussels, described by Starmer's office as mere talks on trade and climate. But sources say that behind the closed doors of the European Commission, the discussions went far beyond that. According to leaks confirmed by major newspapers, the PM discussed mechanisms for dynamic regulatory alignment, a technical jargon that, in practice, would mean bringing the UK back in line with Brussels rules. Environmentalism, digital standards, artificial intelligence, energy policy. Everything on the table. And the worst part, without Parliament's knowledge, not even the ministers of his own Labour Party. The move smacks of a stealthy return to the pre-Brexit era, a disguised attempt to stitch back ties that the British people, in a historic vote, had decided to sever. Insider sources say the draft agreement was prepared by advisors linked to former pro-EU negotiators. And most shockingly, some leaked clauses explicitly mention the possibility of the UK considering partial adoption of European standards. It's the kind of political maneuver that could set the country ablaze, and that's exactly what happened. The real spark came when King Charles, in an extremely rare and symbolic gesture, decided to speak out. Buckingham Palace released a short but devastating statement. The Crown maintains the constitutional duty to be consulted on matters affecting parliamentary sovereignty. In other words, the monarch is concerned, and when the king speaks, even in neutral tones, the whole country listens. Historians say that since the crisis of Edward VIII, the royal household has avoided interfering in political disputes. That's why the mere fact that Charles expressed concern for sovereignty was seen as a direct message to the government. Sources close to the royal family say the king was deeply troubled to learn that discussions of constitutional impact had taken place without formal consultation with the Crown. The episode reignites a debate thought long buried. What is the boundary between the Prime Minister's political power and the moral authority of the monarchy? For many conservatives, the king's gesture is more than symbolic. It's the start of an institutional pushback against a government that may be overstepping the red lines of Britain's unwritten constitution. Inside Westminster, the atmosphere has become a powder keg ready to explode. Labour MPs from the so-called Brexit wing, those who insist on respecting the 2016 vote, are furious. 3 MPs have already filed formal requests demanding immediate access to the minutes of the Brussels meetings. Insider sources report that private messages exchanged between Starmer's aides reveal fears of an internal rebellion. Some ministers, once loyal, now openly talk of resignation if the Prime Minister does not come clean. And while the cabinet scrambles to put out fires, the opposition smells blood. Rishi Sunak, in a grave tone, called a press conference to accuse the government of neglecting transparency and violating the spirit of British democracy. The press has dived headfirst into the story. Tabloid headlines scream betrayal, secret pact, and coup against Parliament. Social media has erupted. Pro-Brexit hashtags are trending again. The country seems to be reliving the same fierce, emotional division that marked the 2016 referendum. Only this time, with the sense that something even deeper, the very control over the national destiny, is being called into question. The public reaction was swift. In the pubs of Birmingham, the squares of Sunderland, and even the small villages of Cornwall, the feeling is the same: outrage. They betrayed the people's vote, say former Labour voters who now threaten to switch to Nigel Farage's Reform UK. Local radio interviews reveal a growing chorus of distrust against the government. And it's not just emotion, it's memory. Many recall the factories closed under Brussels-imposed regulations, the fishing industry destroyed, the soaring energy costs in the name of European environmental targets. Now, the fear is seeing all that return disguised as technical cooperation. In just 48 hours, polls recorded a sharp drop in public confidence in Starmmer. Analysts say this is the kind of crisis that defines careers and sometimes ends them. The country is gripped by the tension of political déjà vu, as if the Brexit battle is being fought again, only this time without a public vote, without debate, and under the guise of diplomacy. And it's at this point that the story takes on almost cinematic proportions. As tension mounted on the streets, new revelations began circulating in the corridors of Whitehall. According to leaked confidential reports, Starmer's team discussed in Brussels the possibility of adopting parts of the EU's carbon pricing system, and even incorporating EU guidelines on artificial intelligence. To the public, these are technical terms, but to those who understand their weight, it's devastating. It means yielding regulatory ground, handing decisions to foreign bureaucrats, and opening the door to the return of supranational control over British domestic policy. The scandal has left the political elite in panic. Journalists report that advisors desperately tried to reinterpret the documents, claiming they were just drafts with no legal value. But the damage was already done. Even traditionally moderate commentators began using the word subversion to describe the government's actions. And amid this storm, one question echoes like thunder. If Parliament was not consulted, who really governs the United Kingdom? The people, the Prime Minister, or Brussels? Before we continue, an important message. If you want to follow every twist of this crisis and receive the next political bombshells firsthand, subscribe now and leave a like. This shows you stand for unfiltered information, sovereignty, and the truth that the mainstream media tries to hide. Your support is what keeps this space free to expose the behind-the-scenes stories the government wants to sweep under the rug. And believe me, what's coming next is even more explosive. The economic impact hit like a dry blow right after the leak. The pound plummeted against the euro, investors pulled back, and the financial markets went on high alert. Constitutional uncertainty, the analysts called it, the city's polite code for no one knows who's in charge. Small businesses, especially those reliant on exports, began publicly complaining about currency fluctuations. And, ironically, while the government defends itself by saying it seeks stability, it was its lack of transparency that destabilized everything. In Manchester, textile business owner Sarah Chen told the press she doesn't care about ideologies, but about clarity. What we can't have is rules changing in secret, she said. Meanwhile, in Grimsby, former steelworkers see the crisis as confirmation that the elite never accepted Brexit. They waited for the first chance to hand it all back, said one ex-employee, tears in his eyes. This silent indignation is about to turn into organized fury, and that's exactly what Reform UK is exploiting with surgical skill. Nigel Farage smelled political blood and acted with the speed of a seasoned predator. In less than 24 hours, he recorded fiery statements denouncing what he called the betrayal I always warned was coming. His videos reached millions of views and reignited the combative spirit of the pro-Brexit electorate. Online, 2016 veterans returned to the digital trenches with hashtags like #Tsatitan Take Back Control Again and #Tsat Defend the Crown. Reform UK sources confirm that Farage is already planning a series of rallies in working-class strongholds, precisely where Labour had regained ground in recent elections. The goal is simple: expose Starmer as the man who promised to respect Brexit and is now dismantling it piece by piece. Recent polls show the immediate impact. Reform UK has risen 3 points in 2 days, overtaking the Lib Dems in several northern regions. Farage himself told supporters that the people's patience has run out, and his tone, far from rhetorical, sounded like the prelude to a political rebellion that could redraw the British electoral map. Amid this whirlwind, the Labour Party seems to be crumbling from within. Sources in the cabinet report that the emergency meeting at number 10 was a spectacle of tension and mistrust. Rachel Reeves, visibly uncomfortable, tried to defend the Prime Minister, saying the talks in Brussels were merely exploratory. But the cold stares of some ministers made it clear. Few believed her. Angela Rayner maintained absolute silence, and to those who know the backstory, that speaks volumes. MPs from the party's northern wing began sending group messages saying the leadership has lost control of the narrative. The Guardian reported that a confidant told a reporter, "Either he comes clean now, or we're finished." In contrast, the Conservative opposition is organizing to exploit every detail. Rishi Sunak was blunt. The British people voted to leave, not to be deceived with new labels. Inside and outside Parliament, the same growing murmur is heard. A Prime Minister who promised to unite the country may have reignited the most destructive division in modern British history. And it was at this moment of political chaos that the turning point occurred. The palace moved again. Sources linked to the royal household say that the king's advisers held discreet talks with constitutional lawyers and historians to assess whether the monarchy's traditional silence was still acceptable in the face of the situation. His Majesty understands the weight of precedent, an insider reportedly said. In other words, the king fears that if the government continues to act without consulting Parliament, the very balance of the constitutional monarchy could be eroded. The mere possibility of the sovereign issuing a second statement has sent shockwaves through London. Conservative newspapers hailed the gesture as an act of courage, while progressive analysts accuse the palace of flirting with political intervention. But the public doesn't seem divided. In polls, over 70% say they support the king's stance as a defender of sovereignty. This massive backing shows that the UK, despite partisan differences, still sees in Charles the last anchor of moral stability against what many describe as a political elite willing to sell out the country for applause from Brussels. Halfway through, and if you want to follow every twist and receive the next bombshells firsthand, subscribe now and leave a like. This shows you stand for unfiltered information and helps me bring you new data and behind-the-scenes stories in the coming hours. Because what's happening, my friends, is just the beginning of a storm that will shake the heart of British politics. By now, even international observers have begun to weigh in. Sources in Brussels say EU diplomats were surprised by the scale of the British reaction. "We thought these were just technical talks," a representative reportedly told Politico Europe, but the damage is done. In Washington, the State Department is watching closely, worried about the impact a London institutional crisis could have on trade deals and the NATO alliance. In the Commonwealth, leaders from countries like Canada and Australia, in reserved tones, comment that the UK seems to have lost clarity about its own role in the post-Brexit world. Analysts point out that the current crisis goes beyond domestic politics. It strikes at the heart of British national identity. After all, how can the country maintain its image of global independence if it's back to negotiating in the shadows with the very structure it swore to leave? The debate is no longer about tariffs or regulations. It's about sovereignty, dignity, and the right of the people to decide their own destiny without intermediaries or technocrats. Now, all eyes are on Parliament. Monday promises to be the tensest day of Starmer's premiership. Sources in Westminster confirm that the Prime Minister's question session will be broadcast live to dozens of countries, and that the opposition is preparing a full public grilling. Conservative and even some disgruntled Labour MPs intend to demand, word for word, the content of the Brussels meetings. The pressure is so intense that rumors of possible resignations are already circulating in the corridors of power. Analysts foresee three possible outcomes. 1. Starmer reveals everything and tries to justify himself, betting that transparency will put out the fire. 2. The leak proves even more damning and drags ministers down with it, plunging the government into collapse. Or 3. The crisis drags on and becomes an unprecedented constitutional showdown. Government versus Parliament, executive versus Crown. And in this last scenario, the country would plunge into uncharted waters not seen since the Civil War of 1642. That's why commentators are already talking about a historic moment, a turning point in the relationship between political power and the nation's moral authority. And this is where everything connects. What began as a diplomatic leak has become an existential test for the United Kingdom. The next 72 hours will define not just the fate of a prime minister, but the future of an entire generation that believed in the promise of Brexit. That of a sovereign country, master of its own laws and destiny. If Starmer yields to pressure and reveals the full content of the negotiations, he may yet salvage some public trust. But if he continues to hide details, he risks igniting a popular revolt that could sweep away the political establishment like a whirlwind. And amid this burning chessboard, King Charles emerges as the figure symbolizing the final limit. The living reminder that the British nation was built on the duty to answer to the people. Because in the end, this crisis is not just about laws, regulations, or treaties. It's about identity, honor, and the sacred right of a people to decide their own path. And if there's one thing the United Kingdom has already proven to the world, it's that when the people are provoked, they react.